Hello, fellow readers and booktubers. A while ago, well, not that long ago, maybe about a week ago, I came upon a booktuber named Heidi, who her booktube station is called My Reading Life. And she has a thing called the President's Reading Challenge. And I think she's been pursuing this for quite a while now. And the challenge is that she would read a biography of each U.S. president in chronological order until she got all the way up to the present. Now, of course, many presidents have more than one biography, and I think she's explored some of the others. And she's been doing this in addition to her regular reading and her regular posts. So it's kind of a leisurely thing. And her last post regarding the President's Reading Challenge, she had mentioned she'd been at this for about 10 years now. But she is up to FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And she's quite charming, and it was very interesting to hear about her explorations in this. But it gave me an idea that I thought I would do a Roman Emperor reading challenge. And I was very excited about it at first, and then the more I thought about it, the more I realized that this was the kind of challenge that would be perhaps about as daunting as trying to climb Mount Everest. And the reason for that is it's got something to do with the very concept of a Roman emperor, which in the popular imagination, I think people don't realize that Roman emperor for a long time in Rome's history was what we might think of as a legal fiction. As far as the Romans were concerned, they didn't have emperors. They had someone that might today be regarded as a generalissimo who's protecting the Roman people from a power-hungry Senate. And then over time, this person becomes all-powerful and what we then would think of as a Roman emperor. You know, once in a while, I'll have a student who will ask me how many Roman emperors were there, and my initial response is, well, that's kind of a trick question. If you look this up in Google and you put that question in, I just did it, I was out of curiosity what would come up. One site said there were 77 Roman emperors. Another one said there were 82, depending how one defines emperor. And then another one, this is my favorite, approximately 70. And the reason for this is that the Romans had really never settled on a definitive mechanism for the transference of power from one emperor to the next. They tried a couple of methods, but over time these methods would kind of break down in the face of rivalries and insane ambition. Sometimes the Romans, there would be kind of a dynasty would emerge. The first group of emperors were part of a dynasty, the famous Julio-Claudian dynasty, in which the office and its powers would be passed on from first father to son, and then from uncle to nephew, from nephew back to another uncle to a stepson, and then if the family bloodline would die out, or maybe it's better to say if the family bloodline spilled out all over the floor, because there are constant assassinations and murders and poisonings in this. But when the Julio-Claudian bloodline died out with the death of Nero, now the Romans had a problem. The dynasty is over, and this office with all this remarkable power and wealth and control, where does that power go to? And so for a while there, this is by the year 69 in the Common Era, or 69 AD, you have a succession of generals marching on the city, each one of them claiming to be the emperor. And one general shows up, his name was Galba, and then later on Otho seizes power, Galba is killed, and Otho commits suicide, just as Vitellius, another general, is marching on the city, and then eventually he's murdered, and then Vespasian comes on the scene, but Vespasian was strong enough and had enough support that he could seize the reins of power and hang on to them long enough to establish his own dynasty, the Flavians. But that dynasty didn't last very long. It went from Vespasian to his son Titus, and then from Titus to Titus's younger brother Domitian, and then Domitian screwed things up, and on and on and on. That year 69, by the way, let me show you something that you might find interesting. There's been a lot written about that. Here's a book that came out a while ago by Gwyn called 69 AD, the Year of the Four Emperors. But just the very title of this book, or the fact that in one single year you could have 4 men claiming to be emperors, kind of tips you off to the problems with, doing a Roman emperor reading challenge. Not all the emperors have biographies. Some of them had reigns that were so brief we don't know much about those emperors. We know their names. We know some of the horrible things they did. We almost always know how they died, usually in battle or they were assassinated by a rival. But it'd be hard to find a biography of some of those emperors. They're usually, you'll get it's kind of like this book. You'll have a group of emperors kind of lumped together under one cover, and the historian will give you as much information as is available about that person. So that kind of is a big challenge to doing a Roman emperor reading challenge. Also, another problem was that by the time you get to the 3rd century, the line of succession becomes so confused that from about 250 to 300 AD, you had about 25 emperors, more or less, approximately, but that many emperors within a 50-year period. So that's an average of a new emperor every 2 years. That's an average. Some of these guys were only emperor for a few months. One of these individuals actually bought the title from the Senate, and he didn't last very long either. So if you're going to start reading the biographies of the emperors in chronological order, when you get to that part of Roman history, it gets really confusing. And then at the beginning of the 4th century, the Roman Empire was divided in half. You'll have a Western Roman Empire and an Eastern Roman Empire. And in the West, it will have the Western emperor, and the East will have its own emperor. So what do you do about that as you're trying to arrange the chronological order of emperors? And then after about 200 years, the Western Roman Empire implodes, and they won't have an emperor again. And, something that used to be referred to as the fall of the Roman Empire. But the Eastern Empire remains, and it'll stand for another 1,000 years. Let that sink in for a minute. 1,000 years, until the city of Constantinople is destroyed by the Ottoman Turks, or taken over by the Ottoman Turks. And so that eastern half of the Roman Empire, which survives the collapse of the West, becomes known as the Byzantine Empire. And it's ruled by a succession of emperors of its own, each with its own dynasty. But those Byzantine emperors, they thought of themselves as Roman emperors. So do you include them in the count? Do you include their names in the reading challenge? Meanwhile, back in the West, around the year 800, Charlemagne was crowned emperor by, guess who? The Pope. And then Charlemagne kind of recreates something's vaguely similar to the Roman Empire. It only included France, parts of northern Italy, and a little bit of the Germanic territories, which, by the way, were never part of the original Roman Empire. But when Charlemagne dies, the title of emperor then goes to his son, Louis the Pius. But when Louis the Pius dies, he had 3 sons, and they divide this up among themselves. They start fighting. One of them dies. The other 2 agree to divide the great Charlemagne's empire was called the Carolingian Empire. They divide that in half. The western half becomes France. The eastern half, where Germany is and parts of northern Italy, that becomes the Holy Roman Empire. And the ruler there takes the title emperor. So do you include those guys in the count? I think you know what I'm getting at here. This becomes it's crazy, but there is a way to approach this idea of a Roman emperor reading challenge if you put the correct parameters on it. Now I'm inviting all of you watching this to join me on this journey. But if you want to alter the journey to your own tastes, you're certainly welcome to do that. Say you might want to just read biographies of the Roman emperors from the later empire. That's cool. Or you might want to focus on the Byzantine emperors, because that's going to present the same kind of challenge as the ancient Roman emperors too, because the Byzantines also did a lot of murdering and assassinations and a lot of warfare too, where some of these emperors get killed in battle and all of that. So you can really approach this any way you want to. For myself, what I'm going to do is limit it to the first 2 centuries of the Common Era, or the first 2 centuries of the Christian era, and look at those emperors, because there There's some confusion in the line of succession, but it's a little clearer what's going on. So it begins with the Julio-Claudians. Then you get that year 69 with 4 emperors, but one of them, Vespasian, emerges triumphant. And so he starts a dynasty called the Flavians, and then that dynasty dies out fairly quickly. And then you get the 5 good emperors, and then there's a few more stragglers after that. So I'm just going to do about the first 200 years of emperors. And again, this won't be continuous. I'll dip into it from time to time. I'll post every once in a while. I'll mention my progress, where I'm at, what biography I'm reading. But there's a couple of things I want to mention here. First of all, if you're interested in pursuing this with me, I think it's important that if you just have kind of an interest in Roman history, but you've never really dug into it more deeply, it's important that you realize what a Roman emperor was and how this office came about and how it changed and mutated over time. And to that end, let me recommend that before you start reading about the Roman emperors, you read Mary Beard's latest book, The Emperor of Rome. Okay, this is magnificent. This is just great. Mary Beard, I've mentioned her many times. She's a great historian. Her most recent book, she's not just talking about one emperor here. She mentions a few by name, but she's talking about the concept of emperor, what it meant to be a Roman emperor, where the title came from, the kind of privileges an emperor had, the kind of dangers an emperor would be in, and how the title was passed on. She addresses all these things I've kind of mentioned already. So, but this is a good introduction, and it's worth reading. It's very well written. It's very casually written. It's entertaining as can be. So if you want to start reading about the Roman emperors, first get a general sense of what this office of emperor was about. And Mary Beard's book, I think, is the best one. Okay, so I'd go with that. Also, I would also recommend, let's see, I jotted down a few notes to myself here. There's a booktuber who specializes in ancient history. Her name is Erica Stevenson. She's at Moan Inc. I'll post the link below when I'm done with this. It's MOAN Inc. It stands for Modern Ancient. Her specialty is ancient history. She does a wonderful job with this. And she talks about the Roman emperors and some of the Roman historians that are interesting to read. Top-notch stuff. So I'd recommend you check out her channel and look at the different postings that she has. And some of them she does kind of address this concept of a Roman emperor. And then one more thing. And this is something that I must emphasize. This is the only thing I'm going to insist on. You can embrace this challenge any way you want to, but I must insist that you don't make the very common mistake in thinking that Julius Caesar was the first Roman emperor. He was not. Okay? He was never a Roman emperor. The idea of an emperor didn't even exist when Caesar was around, although not long after his death, this concept starts to emerge. Just let me give you some quick background here in Roman history. For about 500 years, Rome was governed as a republic. The U.S. system of government is loosely based on the Roman model because the Roman model was fairly successful for 5 centuries. And what the Romans had, they had a Senate, they had popular assemblies, which had some vestige of a democratic system. They would vote, the people could vote on things. And then there were the magistrates, and the magistrates existed on a hierarchy. Some magistrates had more power than others and more responsibility than others. And as you move through that hierarchy, at the very top of it was the Roman consul, the most powerful man in Rome. But the Romans were always nervous about monarchy and tyranny, and they didn't want one man to have too much power. So every year they would elect 2 consuls so they could keep each other in check. So no one consul would become more powerful and dominant than the other. That was the theory. And it seemed to have worked pretty well for them for a very long time. The first century before Christ, or the first century before the Common Era, Rome had become an empire, and there was tremendous power to be had and tremendous wealth and tremendous influence. And some very ambitious Romans, some of them military generals, some of them just brazen demagogues, begin to fight each other for ultimate control of this mighty empire. And and over a period of about a century, the Roman republican institutions begin to crack. Cracks begin to appear in the foundations. Things start to fall apart. And the Roman respect for the law becomes undermined. The Romans had always prided themselves on being a people of the law. And suddenly that's being compromised and torn apart. And in the midst of this, then comes Julius Caesar. And he is the most successful at undermining all these ancient institutions, amassing more and more power for himself. But before he can complete the job, and it was believed that he was trying to make himself a king, he was assassinated for his troubles, March 15th, 44 BCE, or BC if you prefer. Most famous political assassination in history. But by that time, Caesar had amassed so much power that by removing him, even though the senators, they were the ones who assassinated him, they seemed to think that everything was just going to go back to normal. But Caesar had so corrupted the system that it was impossible for that to happen. And in due course, his son, actually his stepson, Octavian, shows up on the scene, and he takes that power for himself, but he's a young man, and so he has to rely on one of Caesar's lieutenants, a man by the name of Mark Antony, and the two of them essentially share absolute power for a few years, and then finally, Octavian will kill Antony. The Battle of Actium. Well, I shouldn't say that. At the Battle of Actium, Antony is defeated, and then he heads back to Egypt to his lady love, Cleopatra, and they both commit suicide, which left Octavian in charge of the entire empire. And somewhere in there, he gets the title, the chosen one, the divine one, the honored one, which in Latin is August, the August, or the Augustus. That's the first Roman emperor. Okay, Augustus is the first Roman emperor, and there's a lot of really good books about Augustus and how he came to power. He's usually referred to by his title Augustus. His name is Octavian, but he's referred to as the title of Augustus, and he was Julius Caesar's. Actually, it was Caesar's adopted son. This is a recent, fairly recent biography of Augustus by Anthony Everitt, which I would recommend. If you want to undertake this Emperor's Reading Challenge. There are a lot of other books about Augustus. This is one, I've already read this one. As I tentatively embrace this challenge, I might reread this one because I recall enjoying it a great deal. But there are many, many others. But if you want to start the reading challenge and want to stick to just the emperors of the first 2 centuries, always begin with Augustus. And I would recommend this one. This one's pretty good. So there's Augustus. And I think I've given you what you need to know now to undertake this challenge if you choose to do so. Now, what I'm going to list below, I'll list that website by Erica Stevens. I'll show the link to her BookTube channel. And I'm also going to list the emperors of the first 2 centuries in chronological order. Okay? And then I'm gonna tag a whole bunch of people. And if I don't tag you, don't be offended. Assume that you are tagged if you're watching this video. And then have at it. Enjoy yourselves. And again, my next post probably won't be about Augustus, but it'll be about some other book or something else that's on my mind. But from time to time, as I said, I'll check in and I'll let you know how it's going and which emperor I'm reading about at that time. So that's what I've got to you for you today. Have fun with this. Good luck, stay strong, and never, ever stop reading.